energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GBNews.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GBNews.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight. The great John Milton said, "Give me the liberty to know, to utter and to argue freely according to conscience above all liberties." And Palestine protesters are planning to continue their efforts on Armistice Day. And while they have a right to peaceful protest, it is unwise for them to exercise that right on such a day. And while we're told that these demonstrations will be peaceful, we have often seen calls for intifada from London to Gaza, and fireworks were aimed at the police over the weekend. As you can see, skirmishes unfolded with the police for the 4th consecutive weekend. There is a component of thuggery in this moment, and it had more than a few bad apples. The Scottish court has ruled that the legal definition of gender is not confined to biological or birth sex, prompting calls for the Prime Minister to change the legal definition and stifle the gender debate. The question is, can you guess how I'm identifying today? Meanwhile, the King's speech tomorrow is set to reveal new legislation that will continue to embolden the UK's energy security. Oil and gas licences in the North Sea will continue to be sold each year under the Prime Minister's premiership. But should we expect the usual backlash from the eco-zealots who attacked a picture in the National Gallery today? Not for the first time, the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, has sparked controversy over introducing new laws cracking down on the use of tents by homeless people, claiming that the practice, in some cases, has become a nuisance and a lifestyle choice. Plus, more and more, it seems, traditional markets are closing across the country. Could it be that what was once a staple of British culture could soon become nothing more than a memory? Well, one man who knows a thing or two about the art of selling will be joining me live in the studio, Tom Skinner, in his State of the Nation debut. State of the Nation starts now. I'll be joined this evening by a particularly Moggalicious panel, the broadcaster and author Amy Nicole-Turner and the former Brexit Party MEP and my sister, Annunciata Rees-Mogg. As always, I want to hear from you. It's a crucial part of the programme. You know it off by heart by now. Mail me, mailmog@gbnews.com. But now it's time for the news of the day with Polly Middlehurst.
Jacob, thank you. Good evening. Well, the top story tonight is that the Metropolitan Police in London is asking protest organisers to urgently reconsider their plans for demonstrations in London during Remembrance commemorations this weekend. Senior officers say they're concerned by the danger posed by breakaway groups who are intent on fuelling disorder. The Met held talks with organisers today, but their requests to postpone the protests were declined. As you've been hearing, Just Stop Oil activists have denied targeting the cenotaph this morning after around 100 protesters were arrested. The group says they were moved to the base of the monument by police after traffic was shut down near Downing Street. Separately, 2 other activists smashed the glass covering a precious artwork at the National Gallery. They were arrested on suspicion of criminal damage. The United Nations chief says Gaza is becoming a graveyard for children. Antonio Guterres says the protection of civilians must be paramount in the conflict between Israel and Hamas. He says Israel's ground operations are hitting civilians, hospitals and UN facilities, including shelters. At the same time, he also says Hamas uses civilians as human shields and continues launching rockets towards Israel. Mr. Guterres says no one is safe.
I'm deeply concerned about clear violations of international humanitarian law that we are witnessing. Let me be clear. No party to an armed conflict is above international humanitarian law. I salute all those who continue their life-saving work despite the overwhelming challenges and risks. And the unfolding catastrophe makes the need for a humanitarian ceasefire more urgent with every passing hour.
Meanwhile, here at home, laws designed to provide a minimum level of cover during strikes have been extended now to ambulance staff, rail workers and Border Force employees. Train staff will be asked to operate 40% of their normal timetable, while Border Security will have to keep airports open during strikes. The Minimum Service Levels Act passed early this year, but has faced criticism from trade unions who say it threatens the right to strike. Transport Secretary Mark Harper says the bill is necessary to protect public services.
There's a balance here that has to be struck between enabling people to go on strike, but also to reflect that for important public services, there is an interest in people being able to have that service. So their minimum service levels, there's a minimum level of service that has to be set out. Parliament passed that legislation earlier this year. We've consulted carefully with unions, with those that provide these services over the summer. We think we've got that balance right, and Parliament will then take a view on these regulations before Christmas.
Mark Harper speaking there. You're with GB News, across the UK on TV, in your car on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying, play GB News. This is Britain's news channel.
John Milton said, "Give me the liberty to know, to utter and to argue freely according to conscience above all liberties." And in a free society such as Britain, you have the right to do all sorts of things with which many people may disagree. But the essence of having principles is that you continue to hold them in times when they are tested. So the pro-Palestinian movement is scheduled to have another march this Saturday on Armistice Day. And this is potentially a significant insult to British tradition and heritage, the nation to which the protesters themselves belong. But the protesters have the right to do it. Peaceful protest is a fundamental right in the United Kingdom. And part of living in a free society is accepting these things, even if you feel that they're unpleasant. Now, there is a but, and an important but. The Public Order Act of 1986 grants the Home Secretary powers to stop protests if they pose a threat to public order. And unfortunately, this proposed protest almost certainly does, and therefore it seems that the Home Secretary would be in her rights to stop it. But it would be better if the organisers cancelled it out of respect for the war dead. The protesters should know, just because you have the right to do something does not mean that you have to do it or that you should do it. Having the legal right to do something is not a moral endorsement of doing that thing. And these protests are not always what they purport to be. We're told these protests are about freedom for Palestinians, but what they've come to represent is this bizarre cross-section of wokery, Islamism and thuggery. The wokery is seen in the pseudo-anti-colonial rhetoric rife on our streets. We're told that Zionism is a colonial project, that it's a matter of European people oppressing other people. But this isn't true, it's just a demonstration of wokeness. Islamism is seen when groups intent on establishing a global caliphate under Sharia law, such as Hizb ut-Tahrir, hold 100-strong rallies on the sidelines of the protests calling for jihad. And as for thuggery, well, just last weekend we saw plenty of it, with people shooting fireworks at police, skirmishes, people being harassed outside McDonald's and railway stations being occupied. The point is that while the majority of protesters aren't violent or extreme, there is a spectrum. On the one hand, you have the sort of people who call for Allah's curses to be on the infidels and the Jews, and on the other, you have the people who are genuinely concerned about Palestine and merely want to express their support for people struggling in Gaza. But in between those two poles, you have a large number of people who may not necessarily be extremist, but hold deeply unsavoury views about Israel, about Britain and about the wider Western world. And it's these people that permit the more extreme elements to exist. It is these people who create the safe space for extremists who then feel able to take to the streets and call for jihad and Allah's curses and other villainies. And it's these sort of people who tear down posters of missing Israeli hostages or vandalise them with obscenities. What would happen if someone were to enter these crowds with an Israeli flag? Well, that isn't a rhetorical question. It happened. And what would happen if someone entered the crowd holding a sign with an accurate statement saying Hamas is terrorist? Again, not a rhetorical question. There is a responsibility on the wider participants to consider the company they keep. And they should also remember the sacrifices their own ancestors made in the wars. It is their Armistice Day as much as any other British citizen. It wasn't just Britain that fought in the great wars of the 20th century. It was the British Empire. Millions of people from across the Indian subcontinent, across Africa, from the Caribbean, from all over the world fought for the Allies. And we should remind our fellow Britons that to respect Armistice Day is to respect our shared heritage. So I urge them to commemorate Armistice Day and leave protesting for another day. As ever, I want to hear your thoughts on this. Send me your views, mailmog@gbnews.com. And I'm now pleased to be joined by Barnaby Raine, the journalist and historian. Barnaby, thank you for coming in. I'm sure you understand why Armistice Day is a very special day, that it's one where the war dead are commemorated. Now, I'm a great believer in freedom of speech, that people have the right to protest. But isn't it wise not to protest on a day that is held aside for something special?
With all due respect, Jacob, I don't think you're a great believer in freedom of speech or that you understand much about Armistice Day. It's literally called Armistice Day and we're marching for an armistice. So ask yourself this question. Who are the people who better represent the traditions of Wilfred Owen and Siegfried Sassoon? Who are the people who better represent the traditions of horror at the carnage of war? Is it a government that is funding and supporting a state that has murdered over 10,000 people now in Gaza, including 4,000 children? Or is it those of us who will pour onto the streets from every community across Britain to say that we want the massacre to stop?
Well, first of all, you're taking the Hamas figures, which we know are unreliable, and that they've exaggerated some of the figures for their own propaganda purposes.
Jacob, every single figure released by the Gaza Health Ministry has an Israeli-issued ID number attached to it, Jacob. Are you saying those figures aren't true?
The Gaza Health Ministry is part of the Hamas state. It's a
Jacob,
Hamas
they have an Israeli-issued ID number attached to them. Did you know that?
The figures that are coming out of Hamas are propaganda.
Did you know they have an Israeli-issued ID number?
They are part of the Hamas state. That's the key point. The Israeli number is an irrelevance. But let's get on to what.
Every single name of a human being released is a verified name, and we've seen pictures of hundreds, sometimes thousands of people.
Let's start with how this began.
When their homes were bombed, when their hospitals were bombed,
and the head of
when
the
their
UN,
refugee camps were bombed.
head of the UN points out that Hamas is using people as human shields. So terrorists are hiding behind children, the elderly, and the unwell, and these terrorists.
Are you really okay with this?
With terrorists, of course I'm not okay with terrorists using human shields. It's disgraceful. It's wicked.
Are you really okay with the bombing of a refugee camp?
human shields are being used by Hamas.
Just answer the question, because we're on the streets because we're not OK with it. Are you OK with the bombing of a refugee
You're
camp?
on the streets supporting, giving succour to people who carried out the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. Are you OK with that? That's where it started.
We're on the streets to oppose the bombing of refugee camps, hospitals, homes, schools. Jacob,
where did this start?
Well, it started in 1948 with the ethnic cleansing of 700,000 Palestinians. When
this started on the 7th of October with the murder of 1,300 people and babies being beheaded. You're justifying that.
Jacob, there are 2.2... Of course not.
OK, so will you criticise Hamas as terrorists?
Listen. I want the violence to end. Here's how the violence can end. There are 2.2 million people penned into an open-air prison in Gaza. The significant majority of those people are not from Gaza. They're refugees who were ethnically cleansed from their homes in 1948. Now, I know that the people you admire are fine with that. Winston Churchill said he didn't mind when a superior race displaced an inferior one.
No.
That's how he talked about what happened in Palestine.
But
some of us feel from all over Britain...
Most of the people... But you've had plenty of time. Most of the people living in Israel have had to go there fleeing persecution where they lived, and mainly persecution in the Middle East.
No, actually, that's not true.
They're mainly Sephardi Jews.
Some of my family members who live in Israel came from Europe.
Yes, but the majority didn't. The majority came from the Middle East.
Do you know why my family went to Israel, Jacob? It's because white Christian Europeans who believed in tradition and hierarchy spent 2,000 years excluding and then massacring us. So I will take no lectures from white Christian Europeans who believe in order and hierarchy about anti-Semitism. Just because people like you spent thousands of years murdering us, I don't think Palestinians
people like me did not do that, actually. You can't blame me.
White Christian
you can't blame me for things that had nothing to do with me.
Do you know why I do? Do you know why I do? Because the same logic that says that some life is worthwhile and other lives aren't, that logic that for centuries Christian Europe
all life is valuable.
Jews
all life is valuable. But
now
surely
that same logic is meted out to Palestinians.
Surely the state of Israel, has the right to defend itself.
Palestinians who are ethnically cleansed to pay for Europe's guilt.
But they're not ethnically cleansed. This just isn't true. They're not ethnically cleansed.
Why is Gaza one of the most densely populated places in the world?
The Israeli state is trying to defend itself following an appalling attack, and it's trying to get terrorists. And these terrorists are using human shields to protect themselves. That's the thing that you ought to be condemning.
Repeatedly, the Israeli state has made claims about human shields, which have been exposed by
and now accepted by the United Nations. The head of the United Nations, we had on a clip 10 minutes ago with the head of the United Nations saying human shields were being used.
Understand.
So are you now saying he's lying?
I just don't understand why you're kind of visibly happy at the ability to justify the murder of enormous numbers of innocent people. The IDF's headquarters is in a residential neighbourhood in Tel Aviv. According to any definition that Israel uses, that means Israel uses human shields. It doesn't mean...
Nobody wants innocent people to be killed.
Nobody wants innocent people to be killed. So do you think Britain should stop funding and supporting it?
Except Hamas wants innocent people to be killed. Hamas kills...
Hamas aren't the people sending weapons to the Israeli state, which has killed 4,000 children. Your government is, so do you support it?
Hamas is the one that killed innocent people and killed babies. Deliberately.
4,000 children, Jacob.
Deliberately. So Hamas goes out and kills, as a matter of policy, innocent people. Then they hide behind innocent people to avoid justice.
Do you know
That's what you're defending.
Do you know what I want? I'm a Jew, right? I want to be able to go and pray at the Western Wall. And I want to be able to pray there next to my Palestinian friends, Muslims and Christians, in peace and freedom. It's not possible. I don't want to pray under a gun that occupies and oppresses the indigenous people of Palestine. I don't want to pray. I don't want to go to parties, as people went to parties on October the 7th, 5 miles away from an open-air prison in which 2.2 million people are penned in without access to sufficient food and water. I don't want that status quo. I
understand that. So are you therefore willing to condemn the actions on the 7th of October?
I want a world where it doesn't happen.
No, so are you willing to condemn it, or are you in fact sitting here justifying it?
Of course I'm not justifying it.
So you're willing to condemn it as an act of terrorism?
Of course I'm not justifying it.
And is a state entitled to defend itself against an act of terrorism?
Let me just ask the question back to you. Are you willing to condemn the murder of 10,000 people, including 4,000 children, armed and supported by the British state, of whose parliament you are a member?
I support the Israeli state's right to defend itself against the attacks on innocent civilians, which you are not being clear about condemning.
Do you support the displacement of 300 children in recent weeks in the West Bank by armed Israeli settlers supported by the British state?
Are you willing to condemn this attack on the 7th of October?
I don't want anyone to die.
You're not. I'm afraid Barnaby isn't willing to condemn Hamas
I don't want anyone to die, but it's your government.
As always, let me know your thoughts. mailmog@gbnews.com. Coming up, you've had ages to bang on. Coming up, Scotland is once again causing problems for the legal definition of a woman, and the Prime Minister has set Britain on the path to energy independence. Or has he?
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the dinosaur hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is Still State of the Nation. We've been discussing the pro-Palestine protest and whether they ought to have one on Armistice Day. Do continue to let me know your thoughts. I've had some messages already from Paul. There's simply no reason whatsoever for this protest. Each of these marches, each weekend, has been getting more and more violent and more verbal and anti-Semitic abuse. The public order law is quite clear. If the police fail to enforce the laws laid down, there's no point in having laws at all. And Charlie, as a veteran, I would not want any remembrance celebrations disrupted by demonstrations. But we serve to defend the right for free speech and to legally demonstrate, many giving their lives to defend those rights. The choice of whether or not to demonstrate is the responsibility of the organiser. If they choose to demonstrate over the Remembrance Weekend, it shows a severe lack of knowledge and respect for the culture of this country. And Charlie, I agree with you, with the exception of the risk to public safety, that people should be free to protest as long as there isn't a risk to public safety. Biological men can now take female-only positions on company boards in Scotland after the Scottish Court of Session, Scotland's version of the High Court, ruled that a trans woman can now be recognised as a woman in law. This means that Scotland's definition of sex isn't limited to biological or birth sex, but if you've got a certificate that you applied for, you can also be legally recognised as a woman or indeed as a man. Now, Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, has been urged to protect the rights of women by specifying through secondary legislation that by law, a woman is a woman as defined through her biological sex. Last year, Scotland's ministers were challenged over legislation aimed at employing 50% of women to an executive board, which stated you must be a woman to apply for the female-only position. Campaigner groups have claimed this new law will ultimately lead to men having more rights than women. So, Amy, is this very unfair on women if men can take all their jobs by filling out a form and saying that they're women?
Are you talking about a gender recognition?
I am, yes.
OK, so again, I think what you're struggling to see the difference between is what's between your legs and what's between your ears. Now, these are different, but they are equally immutable, and something that... So let's think about it. Biological sex and your gender identity. Two different things, equally as valid, equally as recognisable in law. And they're both equally needed to be respected, as they have been for years. A gender recognition certificate is nothing new. If anything, the problem is accessing one is not as straightforward as it should be, and plenty of trans people go through their lives without a gender recognition certificate because it's a long-winded process, which is why we saw the reforms in Scotland, which didn't go through here, which should have gone through here.
It's not very long-winded. It's 2 years. And just like an abortion, you need 2 doctors to sign off that that is how you are and that is what you want to be, and it costs £5. Now, there are in this world quite a lot of ambitious men, I would like to suggest. And if you are an ambitious man and you think that it will be easier to get to the top of the tree by claiming you're a woman, you will do that. And there are plenty of ruthless men who will. And they are exactly the same men who might want to go into an all-women's prison, who might want to be allowed into women's refuges. And this is a threat. We need women-only spaces to protect the rights we fought so hard for. So, my mother-in-law couldn't get a widow's pension for her husband because he wouldn't be a widow. She had to fight for those equal rights, and suddenly they're all being taken away again, and men are being...
So a gender recognition certificate is more what goes on your birth certificate, your death certificate. So to suggest that a man would be legally a woman on their death certificate to get a job is quite a nonsense to me, really. And I'd love to see some evidence of this happening. Now, when you talk about the women's protected spaces, such as prisons... May I finish? The prisons and the refuge example. Now, these are clearly on a... Still, even with a gender recognition certificate, if you're transgender, they're still taken on a case-by-case basis to avoid any deception that you describe. Now, saying...
Do you think that's right?
Of course it's right, because then that avoids instances like we saw in Scotland with the Isla Bryson case, which was obviously a mistake, and that was an example of a man using gender identity to get what he wanted.
As other men will to get promotion.
No,
it is putting women backwards yet again.
You can't. Hang on. If a man had a gender recognition certificate and he pretended to be a woman to get this promotion at work, when he got married, all his vows would have to be gendered and he'd be someone's wife. You can't really suggest that someone would do that to get a promotion at work. That's a nonsense.
Men will do all sorts of things.
Annunziata, do you think if a man's had an operation that is sufficient? Is that different, that if a man has had the sex change operation, then he should be recognised as a she?
It's certainly different, and the physicality is less of a threat to women, but also it shows a very, very deep dedication, and I think people should absolutely be allowed to choose. I think it is within everyone's right to choose how to live, but I think this recognition in law is really very threatening to women.
And Amy, isn't that the point, that if people have, in your terms, matched their heart and their head, so to speak,
and biological sex,
that they've actually had the operation, then recognising them as a different gender seems to me to be perfectly reasonable. But if it's still only in their head, Is it completely credible?
But then that puts a lot of pressure on somebody already struggling enough with their identity to then undergo really invasive medical procedures in order to conform to your gendered expectations.
But isn't it fake
which they're
until
already,
they've done that?
But they're already...
Don't they not really believe it? If they don't want to be...
That's the issue, isn't it? You don't believe it. But they believe it because it is immutable.
But dare I say, how do you know that they believe it?
Why...
It's because, to Annunziata's point, it can be very convenient. It can be something that people want to do, and we've discussed it with prisons before, and you've admitted that.
But nobody in those situations, Adam Johnson, Isle of Bryson, did not have a gender recognition certificate. It's different.
Had he lived as a woman for 2 years and asked 2 doctors to sign it and paid his £5, he could have done. And that is absolutely within his rights, as the Welsh, Scottish and English people can do. As it happens, he hadn't, but he very, very easily could have done, and others will. And being able to impose on what should be women's protected spaces, because we've had to fight for generations to get equality, to then remove it and to remove our safety, I think
but
is
you
very
know,
worrying.
the women's spaces that are always brought up in these conversations, the changing rooms, the toilets, nobody is presenting their birth certificate when they're going into these spaces. They're going on what they appear as. And that's why these conversations, all these conversations attack women. So women who don't conform, taller women, broader shouldered women, are now getting questioned when they use women's spaces because of this trans moral panic.
And should lesbian groups be forced to admit people with penises?
See, this always comes up.
Known as men.
Just swipe the other way.
We're beginning
It's
to get
really
quite
quite
explicit from my sister. I've never heard her use language like that before. Anyway, that was my brilliant panel, the author and broadcaster Amy Nicole-Turner and the former Brexit Party MEP Annunziata Rees-Mogg. So thank you to them. Coming up next, Just Stop Oil activists targeted the Cenotaph today as the Prime Minister is set to introduce new legislation emboldening Britain's energy security. And I'll be diving into the decline of the English market with the mighty Tom Skinner.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows...
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Well,
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie, second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. I remain Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. We've been discussing the great gender debate, and here are your thoughts. Anne says, my son would like to know if he'd get longer off work if he identified as a woman and claimed maternity leave instead of paternity leave when his wife gives birth next month. Well, Anne, let me give congratulations to your son and your daughter-in-law. That's a very good question. And Angela says, Jacob, we do not need to guess your identity. State of the Nation faithful followers know you're identifying as Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg. Well done, Angela. You ought to win a prize. The King's Speech is approaching, and all sorts of legislation is set to be introduced in tomorrow's opening of Parliament, including plans to allow North Sea oil and gas licences to be sold every year under the North Sea Transition Authority. Part of Energy Secretary Claire Coutinho's argument for the move, as spelt out in Telegraph today, is it will provide certainty for the 200,000 jobs reliant on the industry. But equally importantly is the question of energy security. As long as we're using fossil fuels to supply our energy, surely it's economical to use our own resources. Well, a third of gas comes from Norway and a third is domestic. The other third is imported from America and Gulf states. And with that comes regasification costs, which fall on Britain's consumers. Well, I'm now joined by Seb Kennedy, the founding editor of Energy Flux News. Well, Seb, thank you very much for coming in. Isn't it sensible to use the resources that we've got and to maximise what is still in the North Sea, such as it is?
Thanks for having me on the show, Jacob. Pleasure to be here. I think before we get into the nuts and bolts of this, there are some common misconceptions that we need to iron out from the offset. One is that drilling for North Sea oil and gas will not improve British energy security. All of the volumes that we produce from the North Sea, the oil gets exported to continental Europe, refined and sent back, and the gas goes into the gas network, but as you've explained, it's really a minimal amount of the mix. We still have to import from elsewhere. So it won't improve British energy security. Drilling for North Sea oil and gas won't drive down prices for consumers, and Claire Coutinho was on the BBC this morning and she made that point on air, and that's also been confirmed by the North Sea Transition Authority. And if I may, there's another common misconception, which is that drilling North Sea oil and gas is going to cause some sort of climate meltdown and a kind of carbon bomb. There's such a pifflingly small amount of oil and gas left at the bottom of the North Sea that it doesn't really matter how much of it we pull up between now and 2050 or whenever. Can I just...
Yeah, do please.
There's a really interesting statistic which puts it in perspective, right? Since the year 2000, the UK gas production from the North Sea has fallen by 2/3. And between now and the year 2050, it's going to fall by another 95%. That's even if we drill for all the remaining oil and gas, it's going to reduce by 95% if we don't, or decline by 97%. So what we're talking about is a 2 percentage point difference against a baseline of terminal decline.
But isn't the decline you're forecasting on the basis of the reserves that are now known to be there, and actually the history of exploration is that you only work out the reserves that are going to be there for the point at which they're economic, and when you've discovered that they're economic, you often find more. So we've been talking about peak oil and running out of gas. I remember as a schoolboy being told we'd run out of the North Sea in 1985, and we've got a long time on from that. So those are based on estimates that will be upgraded as people actually do the work. And to the point on energy security, if we're getting a third from Norway and we're getting a third from our own resources, anything we can increase that third by from our own resources is admittedly marginal, but is nonetheless a boost to energy security, makes us less dependent on LNG.
Marginally, maybe, and I'm not ideologically opposed to extracting what remains of North Sea oil and gas for the very reason that there's so little of it. It's really an irrelevance. And what it is doing, it does two things, right? First of all, it stokes a really unhelpful tribalistic debate between are you like pro or anti-fossil fuels, which is just not helpful because it distracts from the question we should be talking about, which is Where is the economic growth opportunity for the UK? Where is energy heading? It's not heading to some kind of golden uplands where we're going to have an oil and gas bonanza. Even if we were to drill all of the undiscovered reserves of the North Sea, you're not going to make much of a dent in that 97% decline slope that I've talked about. Where is the opportunity in energy? It's in clean, renewable fuels. And how do we produce those? In the same North Sea, but using offshore wind that we have an abundant resource of, and using that to decarbonise electricity, to produce electrolytic fuels, and then exporting those to markets that are screaming out for clean fuels that will have massive export opportunities.
What do you mean by electrolytic fuels?
OK, so...
You mean hydrogen?
Yeah, hydrogen is...
But look, we're finding a huge amount of agreement, because I've always thought the most exciting thing about offshore wind is that you can use it when it's not being used to power the electricity grid to make hydrogen, and you get the hydrogen effectively for free. So I don't disagree with you at all that we should be using all the technologies available, but we're not there yet, and in the interim we should maximise the resources that we've got.
Yeah, well, hopefully we can, what's the phrase, chew gum and walk at the same time, right?
Yeah, indeed,
I don't see why we can't, maybe produce the economically recoverable reserves in the most clean and low-carbon, low-emissions way possible.
Which the new licences insist upon.
Well, no,
and I know you say that Norway's done better.
I'm sorry, they don't insist upon that. We are importing bucket loads of gas from Norway, which produces gas at 4 times less carbon emissions intensity than the UK. Why? Because the Norwegian government... Excuse me, let me finish. The Norwegian...
We're running out of time. But I understand that. But the new licences are much tighter.
No, they're not.
They are.
No, they really aren't.
They really are. Anyway, we've got one point of disagreement. Otherwise, we're agreeing much too much. Thank you, Seb. Coming up, the Home Secretary finds herself under fire once again for controversial remarks, this time regarding homelessness. And don't forget, I'll be speaking to the mighty Tom Skinner about the decline of the English market.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the dinosaur hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows...
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I continue to identify as Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. We've been discussing oil and gas, and we've got some of your thoughts. Kathy says, we should be proudly striving towards our own energy security. We shouldn't have to rely on other nations for such basic resources. And Gary, it's important to be cautious in such endeavours. We have to respect our planet while also providing for ourselves. Over the weekend, Home Secretary Suella Braverman caused outrage on social media. Actually, Suella causes outrage on social media practically every morning when she described rough sleepers living in tents as having made a lifestyle choice. In a tweet ahead of the King's speech tomorrow, the Home Secretary outlined new plans to restrict the use of tents by homeless people. Mrs Braverman said that those who pitch their tents on the street cause nuisance and distress to the rest of the public, while the Lib Dem spokesman labelled her proposals as grim politics. Are the Home Secretary's plans needed? Well, with me is my panel, the author and broadcaster Amy Nicole-Turner and the former Brexit Party MEP, Annunziata Rees-Mogg. Annunziata, is this a reasonable thing for the Home Secretary to say it's a lifestyle choice and it is unsightly?
It's certainly unsightly. It's also unhygienic and a cause of crime. Would I prefer to have politicians who call a spade? Yes.
Amy, I don't know if you caught the end of Nigel's programme, but he had somebody on who works for a homeless charity who was actually saying that it's rather more nuanced than this, that people have drug problems and mental health problems, and that you need to provide a support and a place for them, rather than simply saying they've made a lifestyle choice.
I mean, of course, you take away the tent, you don't take away the problem, do you? I think that homelessness is a product of government failures. And in fact, we've seen a quarter of a 26% increase in the last year alone. And over the last 10 years, a 75% increase in homelessness. There's a lot more going on than just the fact that people are pitching up. Nobody wants to sleep in a tent. So to address this...
No, I think you're absolutely right. And taking away the tent obviously doesn't solve the problem. However, she was in fact talking quite specifically about foreign nationals who do appear to use it as a lifestyle choice. And I think there are small tent cities, but we can look abroad to much bigger ones where people have formed full communities, and this very much changes the landscape. But I think the real fundamental problem is that all the B&Bs that once upon a time would have been used for temporary housing of people are being used by illegal immigrants, and there is no space left. You can't have it in every direction. There are not enough places for people to stay. And we've got to sort out that problem first. But I would still rather have plain talking politicians.
But you're right in that there isn't enough accommodation, there isn't enough housing, because there's a direct correlation between housing affordability and homelessness. That's why in San Francisco you have these tent cities. California has a massive problem with it because of the affordability of housing. That's something we have here, particularly in our cities. And so if we want to deal with this, we need to create affordable housing. We need to raise housing benefit. We need to give people a chance.
We need to have affordable housing for people who are working productively in our cities and providing services we require. You cannot just expect to turn up in Belgravia and be given a house. That people have to live with where they can afford to live, and we should spread our economy far more widely so that that is a feasible option, rather than everyone trying to crowd into very expensive areas.
The problem is, though, that there's too many people who can't afford to live anywhere. That's the issue. Somebody that speaks really well on this is Lord Bird, the founder of The Big Issue. He's been talking about it all day. And he says that housing affordability is one of the biggest drivers of this.
It's not an affordability issue for rooflessness, is it? Because Westminster City Council, for example, will provide a roof for anybody who is in Westminster, and they are very good at doing that. But the rules on not taking dogs in, the rules of not taking drugs, and the rules of not taking alcohol put people off taking up the places in shelters.
And indeed Shelter itself, the charity and the Salvation Army all operate on the same rules. And it's the threat to the other people staying there that they clearly can't take people who are under the influence of any form of substance, alcohol or otherwise.
That's why the Housing First initiative, that Lord Bird, that I would just love everyone to go take a look at, which has been rolled out in Finland. I think it's been trialled here, which is housing before anything else. We will put you somewhere, and then after that, we'll sort out your alcohol problems, we'll sort out your domestic violence situation, we'll sort out all the reasons why you are on the street before anything else.
But that's easier said than done.
But it works in other places.
But sorting out people's problems is something that you can't always do.
It's very housing first, everything comes second. Housing is a human right. Nobody should be living in a tent. That's surely something that we agree on.
Well, but we managed to get the problem removed during COVID, when there weren't people sleeping on the streets. If we could do it then, why hasn't that been continued with?
I think we have a very disjointed government, and I know you are part of the Conservatives, but as in name and mind, but I think they really need to get all the aspects of government to work together, and that this is partly
which is what they did during COVID.
This is partly house building, this is partly local councils.
Do you know a proposal that Lord Bird put forward was a Minister for Poverty Prevention? That's taking all those threads that contribute to this problem and tying them up with one minister who can dedicate his entire portfolio to this problem.
But Suella did highlight something that people are concerned about, and there was a report in the Daily Mail about the King of Park Lane, who has set up some magnificent tent there, and there are cases where things are happening that really shouldn't be happening.
You can see it driving around London quite clearly, that there are quite extensive tents going up. I saw one just last night in Victoria that all sorts of amazing contraptions had been put together to build really quite a big thing, certainly much bigger than a double bed. But that doesn't overcome the problem. Can I leave you with one thought?
Briefly, yes.
Tonight, the temperatures are going to be below freezing. We're all wearing poppies here. There are thousands of veterans who are involved and homeless in the streets, sleeping in tents tonight. That needs to be solved.
Well, thank you very much, my panel, who we will see next week. Market stalls enhance the dynamic and varied character of the UK's economy. Local markets emerged as a significant aspect of British culture in the 1870s. These historic markets not only serve as commercial hubs, but also serve as repositories of cultural heritage, preserving traditions, craftsmanship and community bonds. Romford Market, which initially focused on sheep and cattle, was established in 1247 during my early childhood, no, during King Henry III's reign. Despite nearly 776 years of continuous trade, the local council has recently considered closing it because of government funding cuts. Well, that's what they blame. This decision comes on the heels of the closure of Smithfield Market in London after 800 years of operation. Could the economic changes mean that markets are no longer going to be around?
Good morning and happy Wednesday, you lovely people. Now, we're down Bury St Edmunds, the sun's shining and we're out on a stall grafting, and we've got some fantastic lines just for you. Look, polo shirts as well, and we've got the lovely hair straightening brushes, cases of Vivian water, and this, my deal of the day, the Sif antibacterial wipes. Of course, the Yankee Candles area. We've got pants ready for Christmas. We've even got Nike Air Force Ones. Of course, we've got the best lines, all cheap as well. We've got the teddy bears, we got the Sif wipes, we got the air brushes, we got the trainers, we got the flat caps, we got the candles, and of course, the best item in the summer, 2 crystal glass champagne glasses, only £1.
Well, I'm joined now by the illustrious salesman and businessman Tom Skinner from the Romford Market. Thank you very much for coming in. I actually went to the Romford Market a few years ago with another TV channel and had a really interesting time. And actually, I bought myself some rhubarb and custard sweets, which I've always very much enjoyed. But you're there. How's your business?
Well, I don't work on Romford Market.
Oh, you don't?
No, so I first started working on Romford Market when I was a kid setting up stalls. Right. And I used to work on the stalls then, but since going on, obviously, we do all over the country. Yeah. We work on Northfield on Saturdays, which is a good market. But I've done all of them throughout Essex, East London, all over it, everywhere. But in general, markets are struggling. I mean, it's very sad to see what's happening with Romford Market as well, because obviously it's a hub of the town.
And what is happening? Why is it turning down? Why aren't people going there and having the camaraderie of buying in a market, but also the good value in a market?
I think the councils need to get behind markets, because you got any single town in the country, you can see shops are derelict, market stalls are starting to close down, and people forget that small businesses, sole traders are the backbone of Britain. Like, these are the people that go to graft, that pay the taxes, that make the economy run, that make the country run, pay for the NHS, pay for the poles and the roads, but yet the councils are losing touch and not supporting the local markets.
And they charge for the pitches, because most of the pitches are provided by the council and licensed by the council.
Pitches now you can actually get very cheaply. But what puts people off is, obviously, the park. They're not run properly, markets, anymore. I mean, there are some that are very well run, but there's a fair few that are dwindling down simply because it's too much to park your car, you know, that they're not looked after as good as what they were. People are now, I think, the worry that I've got is, as a kid, getting on my bike, driving down to Romford Market, the smell of the burger vans, buying the pig's ears for the dogs, the whole nostalgia of the market was fantastic. And now if you look at Romford Market, it has dwindled down. It's still a good market, but it's nothing like what it was. And I think the councils need to get behind them.
And is there the value there? You talk about getting the pig's ear for the dog, and it was cheap, it was ready, it was there, and the value is still in the markets.
People are losing touch that you can get the best deals in the world from the market. You know, when you go on Amazon or on your sitting indoors, like, you just click on, there's no emotion to it, right? When you go to a market stall, you're not just buying from a random person, you're buying from a person that gets up at 3 in the morning, that works hard, that might be saving for their little girls' dance lessons, whatever. You're supporting a local small business. They're fantastic.
And what sort of things are you selling at
whatever I get my hands on.
Anything.
Whatever I get my hands on, Jacob, you know?
Yeah. So what sort of range? Huge range?
The main thing that we do is mattresses, pillows, bedding, and then we obviously do, I mean, going into Christmas, we've got all our gift sets, bath sets, Nivea sets. We've got literally anything we get around. I mean, at the minute, on boschmarket.co.uk, you can see a wide range of bits and pieces I've got for sale.
So you've got a website as well, so it's not purely your market?
Yeah, so because obviously the problem where I think we've got like 1 million followers over the 3 platforms on social media now. People always go, oh, right, Tom, I see you at a market in Bury St Edmunds, but I can't get down there because I live in Leeds. So I've made a website where you can go online and some of my products will be on there and we can send them out.
And how do you compete on price? Because you're competing against people who are buying huge quantities. And
cheap.
You're cheap.
Miles cheaper.
You're miles cheaper. You're better value than anybody else.
This is what people. I mean, big supermarkets, big brands, they take the mickey, you know, like, because they're wiping out all the small people, and then now they're starting to charge what they want. You've seen the cost price. The cost of living is ridiculous at the minute.
Indeed. And so people can come to you and say, look, I won't give you that, I'll give you that. And do you do a bit of haggling?
It's all about the haggle, isn't it? You know what I mean? Like,
so that's the fun of it, isn't it? And then your customer goes away thinking that they've got a really good price, and they have got a good price.
Of course, I love going to work. I love meeting people, greeting people, making people smile, you know. Someone wants to haggle, let's have a little haggle, let's have a deal. It's what it's all about. It makes the world go round.
And you started when you were very young. Are there still people starting young, you know, family members and so on, who go along and help out?
Yeah, cool. I mean, like, obviously, my kids are only very little. I've got 3 children.
Well, I got my children canvassing when they were still in the pram. They were never too young. Sweeping the chimneys. No, not sweeping the chimneys. They're not allowed to do that.
We'll get them sweeping the chimney, but yeah. I think. Look. Go and support your local market, pop down there, see, people don't realise the deals that you can have, the products that you'll find, and the fun that you can have on a market.
And the people that you meet who are like you, friendly, full of bonhomie, and offering you a good deal.
100%, that's what
it's the way to get through the cost of living crisis. Well, thank you very much, Tom. That's all from me. Up next, it's Mark Dolan. Mark, what is on your bill of fare this evening?
Well, Jacob, is this country now in the grip of religious extremism? And why won't dozy cops stand up for British traditions, British values and British history? Plus, Nigel Farage on Humza Yousaf's call for the marches to go ahead this weekend. Plus, we've worked out the difference between a man and a woman, and we'll be getting help from the brilliant Olympic swimmer Sharon Davies on that. So a busy show, plus my big opinion and my all-star pundits. It's a busy couple of hours to come, Jacob. You won't want to miss it.
Well, you've got a lot coming up, and it is really important, this march, isn't it? That it seems to me the right to freedom of speech is not something you have to exercise deliberately to antagonise people, which seems to me a march on Armistice Day is trying to do.
Absolutely right, it should not be weaponised, and that's going to be my main point. But an all-star cast, we're looking forward to it, Jacob.
Oh, well, that's going to be very exciting. I like hearing more about dozy cops. I'll be back tomorrow at 8 o'clock. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg. This has been State of the Nation. The weather's coming up, and I know that the weather in Somerset will be expialidociously good.
Hi there and welcome to the latest forecast for GB News from the Met Office. Showers for many of us continuing over the next 24 hours. The most frequent of these will be in the west. The clearest skies and the driest intervals will be towards the east. We've got low pressure sitting to the north of Scotland at the moment and a keen west-northwesterly airflow driving those showers in. And in fact, across western Scotland, some longer spells of rain expected through the evening. The showers will continue to feed into the north and